So one of the things that we do talk a lot about on this channel is reforming the voting practices for the UK. And I have said numerous times, the best way to completely really bring about a proper political change, revolution in this country is to bring proportional representation in. Now, I've said many times in what form and what fashion this will take, we don't exactly know. I'd be perfectly happy, for example, if we kept maybe Parliament as it is, and MPs were elected maybe first past the post, but the House of Lords was changed to a proportional representative system and was, changed to, maybe we called it, the House of Lords still, just for, heritage sake. I'm sure that will keep some sectors of the public quite happy, although I suspect it will be a very small minority who will be somewhat happy about that. But yeah, that would be a massive sea change, and I think that will be, again, something good to push for. But also, I do agree that MPs should be elected by proportional representation. So I am really for either or just both together, because if we achieve either one of those, outcomes, it will be a huge revolution and change in the politics for this country. And I do think this is something that we need to push for going forward, and to really think about how we can achieve this. And there are numerous organisations out there, mainly the main two, if you want to find out more about proportional representation, I always advocate for, are the Electoral Reform Society and, of course, Labour for PR. So go check those guys out. They are fantastic websites, loads of question and answer sessions, questions answered, how we can go about achieving this, how we can campaign for it, and so on and so forth. But I think there's a fair question, and I think this article does a good job of asking it. What would proportional representation actually look like? So before we get into that, please do remember to hit that like and share button, and of course down below there's a link to my Patreon page and a one-off donation link. And as always, thank you very much to the people who do support me that way. Like I say, the people who did support me this way have helped me do this upgrade, to a new fancy camera, and that is, again, like I say, guys, thank you so much. And like I say, I do have other plans to expand and do other, get other types of equipment and other types of stuff that will help me up the value, should we say, of the channel and content that I can put out and give to you guys. So today's article comes from the Yorkshire Bylines, and the title is, as we said, what would proportional representation actually look like? Because again, this is what a lot of people say. Well, what do you mean when we want proportional representation? What does it actually mean? So, the campaign to reform our outdated voting system is gaining more traction than ever before, with campaigning organisation like Make Votes Matter and their recently launched project Labour for a New Democracy making huge strides towards fixing our broken system and getting the ever-elusive Labour Party to finally come out unequivocally in favour of fair votes. But let's fast forward to the day when we finally secure our right to be properly represented in Parliament, by politicians we actually choose. How will voters' visits to the polls stations be any different, and what might they need to be aware of before we go and put their crosses or number in the polling on the polling that day? There we go. Here I will attempt to explain the ins and outs of the most common proportional voting systems, as we will providing some insights into the thoughts of some of the major parties and politicians in Yorkshire. So, the first type is the single transferable vote. The single transferable vote system, or STV, is widely considered to be one of the most proportional voting electoral systems available, and is the preference of the Electoral Reform Society as well as the Liberal Democrats. The system is currently used to elect Parliament of the Republic of Ireland, local councils in Scotland, as well as of November 2020, local councils in Wales. And when voting under STV, rather than putting a cross in the box next to your preferred candidate, voters rank their candidates in order of preference, 1 to 3, and etc. In practice, this means that no votes are wasted, as any votes given to a candidate above the quota required to be elected, calculated based on the number of seats to be filled and the number of votes cast, they are redistributed to other candidates based on voters' second preference. This eliminates the problem we have currently, where tens of thousands of votes essentially go straight in the bin when the candidate has already secured enough votes to be elected. If no candidate reaches the number of votes needed to be elected, then the least popular candidate is elected and their votes are redistributed to voters' subsequent preferences until each seat is filled. STV requires a multi-member constituencies rather than just a single-member constituencies, as we currently have in the UK. So, for example, Bradford currently contains 5 parliamentary constituencies, each electing 1 MP, whereas under STV, they might all be amalgamated into one big Bradford constituency, electing 5 MPs depending on how the boundaries are drawn. So it is for this reason that some are so opposed to STV, as it could weaken the constituencies link and MPs under the current system. Stuart Godwin, who leads the Liberal Democrats on the Leeds City Council, is their candidate for mayor for West Yorkshire and a proponent of the system. He told me this: Our current voting system creates what they call a safe seat. That is disencouraging to people to vote because they think their vote is worthless, and drives lazy politicians that feel more accountable to the party HQ than to their electorate. PR means that every vote counts, voters feel better represented, and politicians need to work harder. So the next one is the party list. So anyone who has voted in the European Parliament election in the UK since 1999 will have had their vote in the party list system. This is commonly used in Scandinavia and countries and the like, and like STV, tends to be necessary larger constituencies than electing multiple members. Unlike our current system, voters simply put a cross in the box to their preferred party rather than a particular candidate. The parties draw up a list of candidates who are elected sequentially, depending on their share of the vote. For example, depending on the calculated thresholds, if a party receives 5% of the vote, only the first candidate on their list is elected. And if they receive 10%, then the first 2 candidates are elected, and so on and so on. This system is highly proportional and very easy to understand, but its critics argue, like STV, it weakens the constituency link, and elected members can often represent very large areas. In the last European elections, for example, Yorkshire and Humber voters elected 6 MEPs to represent the entire region. Some also argue that the system takes power away from voters, in that parties tend to compete for control over which candidates end up on their lists and in what order they are selected. This means that parties could potentially insert undesirable candidates, with voters having very little control over who the specific representative is. So this is the next one. This is the additional member system. The additional member system, or AMS, is also known as the mixed member proportional, or MMP. It is used very successfully all over the world, including in the UK, for elections in the London Assembly, Scottish Parliament and the Welsh Parliament. And in countries such as Germany and New Zealand, it is seen by many as the best of both worlds system, as it maintains the strong local constituency link and is proportional. AMS is essentially the combination of our current first-past-the-post system and a party list system, where voters are given 2 ballot papers on election day. One to elect their local MP in exactly the way they do now, and another where they vote for the party rather than a specific candidate. The list ballot is used to compensate for the disproportionality of the first-past-the-post system. For example, if the party gets 10 constituency MPs elected, but actually received enough for the popular vote to get 15 MPs, this is very common under the first-past-the-post, then 5 candidates from their list will also be elected as a top-up in order to make the result more proportional. The list MPs won't have a specific constituency, but will most likely represent an entire region instead. In Scotland, for example, 73 MMSPs are elected to represent local constituencies, and 56 are taken from the top-up lists, even SMPs for each of the 8 regions of Scotland. Labour MPs for Leeds West North, Alex Sobel, is a fan of this system and is keen to maintain the relationship voters have with the constituency. As an MP, he told me this: "The winner takes all results throw millions of votes on the electoral scrap heap, which is why Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland have moved to a more proportional voting system already. PR promises an exciting opportunity for citizens to consider, deliberate and decide for themselves how the House of Commons should be elected." The downside of AMS, however, is that it wouldn't eliminate the, quote, safe seats that frustrate so many voters currently, due to the presence of the first past the post element. However, like all the systems outlined above, voters would have more than one representative to go through with their concerns. This means that any constituency MP that isn't the slightest bit interested in a particular issue, again, very common currently, they can go to their regional MP or MP instead, rather than being left completely voteless. So this is the other one. This is the alternative vote system, or the AV one. Where we may remember this from, when did we have the vote now? That referendum, was it back in 2012, I think? I think it was. Might have been earlier than that. So, alternative vote. It is worth quickly mentioning the alternative vote, or the AV system. In 2011, the coalition government held a referendum on whether or not to change our voting system to AV. The electorate voted 68% in favour on a 42% turnout of keeping first past the post. This resulted in critics of PR often argued that we've had a referendum on the subject and the public didn't want change, in order to shut down any discussion on the subject. However, I cannot stress this enough. AV is not a proportional voting system. Under AV, voters rank candidates in order of preference the same way they do as the STV. But the key difference is that AV would use the same constituency boundaries as first past the post, meaning that it still is a majority system. The more members being elected, the more proportional the result will be, which is why STV and the party list system are the most proportional. AV would be an improvement over our current system in some aspects, but would remove the need for tactical voting, which allows voters to express support for multiple parties. However, in some circumstances, such as the 2015 general election, AV would have actually resulted in an even less proportional result than first past the post. This is in a report by the Electoral Reform Society outlines. So, the UK has never actually been given a choice about having a fairer vote system, and a recent survey by the Public Administration and Constitutional Affairs Committee found that 77.9% of people say the priority should be to fix our voting system. We've only touched on a few of the most common proportional voting systems here, all of which have already been used successfully very close to home. There are, however, many more types of the proportional voting system and many more different ways of counting votes under the systems outlined above. While different parties and politicians have their own preferences, Make Votes Matter, the most prominent campaigning organisation for fair votes in the UK, believes that the Westminster electoral system should be decided by the Citizens' Assembly in an evidence-based deliberative process. The principles of good voting are laid out in their Good Systems Agreement, which has been signed by many individuals and organisations and political parties, including every major progressive party in the House of Commons apart from Labour. Neil Bennett, the former leader of the Green Party of England and Wales, and now a member of the House of Lords, agrees with the approach. The fight that needs to be won, is for PR, and that we can worry about the details. Then we can worry about the details. I believe getting a modern functional constitution for the UK requires people's constitutional convention to thrash it out. That's a democratic way forward. Natalie also summoned up the desperate need for electoral reform bluntly when she said this: "The democratic need is obvious. The UK cannot be called a democracy until Parliament reflects the views of the people, which is no way it does now. While the Tories have 100% of the power in the Commons after winning only 44% of the vote. But there's also a powerful argument for PR-elected governments providing better quality of governance. PR is a really simple for voters. You vote for what you want and you get it." So, like many people in the UK, If you would like to be casting your vote under one of the above systems sooner rather than later, then get involved with either Make Vote Matters, write to your MP, table a CPL motion if you're a Labour member, and chat to friends and family about fixing our crumble electoral system over a virtual coffee. We need to do all we can to spread the word and keep the momentum building. And again, I constantly agree. This is why I constantly talk about it. We are, I think, getting to that time where people do realise we need to change our system for the better. So again, I do hope we do get to that stage. And like I say, when that does happen, you can be almost assured I will be here going all guns blazing, advocating for hopefully our new proportional, representative system. Now, which one would I like? I'd like, to be honest, which is called now the single transferable vote. I think that seems to be making the best argument for it. I do think that seems to be the best system. But again, both do seem good, but then I do agree with the critics that there is a lack of losing your, constitutional and situational MP, which I do agree with. But again, it sort of, swings and roundabouts. Sometimes you lose something, but you do gain something better as a result. So, like I say, as always, please do hit that like and share button. And of course, down below, there is a link to my Patreon page and a one-off donation link. And as always, thank you to people who do support me that way. And we'll always see you soon and see you next time.